Thank you very much, Excel, and all the stakeholders for this important invitation. I truly appreciate it. Let me just try to share my screen with you now. All right, I have this invitation to speak on how the oil and energy companies can lead the green transition. I think this is a very, very important topic. That is my outline, and I will try to squeeze this through in the next 15 to 20 minutes. Then I can take questions after the presentation. Well, as you may be aware, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, on the 29th of August, 2022, called on all oil and gas companies to accelerate efforts to help the transition to cleaner energies, while at the same time trying to concede that investment in oil and gas will still be needed at some, at least in the near term. The report also went to say that a failure by these companies, that is the oil and energy companies or oil and gas companies, that their failure to address growing costs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions could threaten their long-term social acceptability and profitability. In fact, it says, and I quote, that the oil and gas industry now needs to make clear what clean energy transitions mean for it and what it can do to accelerate clean energy transitions. We are also very much aware that in the past year, there has been very, very significant switch in mood around the world about the activities of oil and gas companies, with increasing numbers of environmental protests and financial institutions pulling back from some fossil fuel project investment. And, Fatih Biroi, who is the IEA executive director, said that no energy company will be unaffected by clean energy transition. So every part of the industry, that is the oil and gas value chain, they need to consider how to respond. Doing nothing is simply not an option. So this paper is about saying that oil and gas companies can play a major role, a very, very significant role in this energy transition. Now, the number of countries that have pledged they have also legislated, achieving net zero. About 64 countries so far have pledged to this net zero in the coming decades, and that is very, very encouraging. And in terms of global investments in the energy sector, you will see a very substantial decline. As you move forward, you find that there will be a decline in the fossil fuel, and there will be a movement gradually and speedily to green energy. And I think that is very, very encouraging. Now, there are also projections about how the energy sector is going to navigate, is going to move forward in the next couple of years, up to 2035, 2050. And these projections are based on a very, very detailed and very robust study that has been conducted by McKinsey. And I want to share these projections with you. And as we look at these projections, it simply tells us that the oil and gas companies need to wake up to make sure that they play a major role in this energy transition. McKinsey says that the future growth in energy investments could be driven almost entirely by renewables and decarbonization technologies. The second thing they said was that while governments and businesses are increasingly committed to steep decarbonization targets, energy markets face extreme volatility driven by geopolitical tensions and a rebound in energy demand. It says that the global energy mix is projected to shift rapidly towards power and hydrogen, and that the share of electricity and hydrogen in final consumption may grow to 32% by 2035 and 50% by 2050. That is wonderful. And that total investments across energy sectors are projected, to grow by more than 4% per annum, and are projected to be increasingly skewed towards the non-fossil and decarbonization technologies, while returns remain uncertain. Renewables are projected, as it were, to account for 80 to 90% of power generation globally by 2050, and that the share of renewables in the power mix is projected to double in the next 15 years. And finally, the projection says that no oil and gas company will be unaffected by clean energy transition. So every part of the oil and gas value chain, they need to consider how to respond, and respond very quickly. So we are building this case to help us to appreciate the fact that the oil and gas companies need to play a major role in this transition. But when we say energy transition, I think yesterday someone may have, but for the purpose of my presentation, I'd like to take the definition provided by the World Economic Forum. When we say energy transition, what exactly do we mean? The World Economic Forum says that energy transition is a timely change. It's a timely change towards more inclusive, secure, affordable, and sustainable energy system that provide solutions to global energy-related challenges while creating value for business and society without compromising the balance of the energy triangle. And I think this is what Dr. Khan was. So Dr. Khan's presentation was along that line. So timely towards more inclusive, secure, affordable, and sustainable energy systems. Now, so there are clear signs that the world is in a position to move away very quickly from the current fossil fuel dependent system, and that this desire, as it were, for change is seen sprinkled throughout our society in small indicators like government policy, changing investment patterns, and innovative technology. So what will be the speed of this transition? And from the literature, you see that the transition, there are those who belong to the graduate school of thought, and those who also see rapidity in terms of this transition. And the analysis can be bucketed into different categories, either in terms of stock and flow, or in terms of linear and exponential technology growth, or in terms of statics and dynamic policy, or emerging markets. So whatever it is, you find that the argument is that there are those who think that the transition may be gradual, others feel that the transition will be very rapid. And I belong to that school of thought that the transition is going to be very, 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 very rapid, and that it is going to be at the speed of lightning. Now, there are 6 channels. So when we say oil and gas companies need to play a role can lead this transition, there are 6 channels through which this can be done. There are 6 channels that will drive this transition across the broader energy resources and industrial sectors, including oil and gas companies, power utilities, and chemical companies and manufacturers. But the oil and gas companies will likely need to leverage on all of these 6 channels to prepare for a lower carbon future. So the point being made here is very clear. And essentially, there are 6 channels, and we are making the strong argument that the oil and gas companies need to key in into these channels in order to be able to lead the transition. I think it's a very, very important argument to canvass, as it were. Now, so the energy transition in the oil and gas sector, companies need to set up you find that most of these oil and gas companies, Total and BP and Eni, etc., they all have targets which they have set for themselves. So Shell currently has no renewable capacity target, but Eni has long-term target of 5.5 GW by 2050. So if you look at this transition, you will find that many oil companies already have targets that they have set for themselves to be able to transition to zero, to zero. So many have set targets for themselves. We are making the strong argument that others need to follow through by setting targets, for themselves. Now we talked about channels through which the oil and gas companies can play a leading role in this energy transition. And if you look at this, these schematics, you find that the 6 channels are in the area of decarbonizing energy sources. Number 2, increasing operational energy efficiency. Number 3, identifying new investment priorities. Number 4, deploying new technologies. Number 5, adjusting to new policy mandates. And number 6, managing consumer and shareholder expectations. So if we are pushing that the oil and gas companies need to play a leading role in the energy transition, these are the 6 channels that we are talking about. And all the companies there need to be able to play, they need to key into these 6 channels if they are to drive and push ahead with this energy transition. Now, huge pressure is falling on oil and gas companies from governments, as we said before, investors to environmentalists, that there's a growing demand for decarbonization, growing demand. And the latest ruling, I'm sure you're aware of this, by a Dutch court, which ordered oil major Shell to reduce its emissions by 45% by 2030, is just an example. And that's the way it is all over the world. Governments and environmentalists are pushing very strongly that the oil and gas companies, they need to play a major role. And in fact, they need to lead the way in terms of energy transition. So while many view the oil and gas industry as a problematic contributor to the issue of increasing greenhouse gas emissions, there are many options available for this sector to contribute to a global transition to clean energy. And we've said they should go through the route of the 6 channels that we talked about. Now, currently, the oil and gas sector has a spotlight on them. The world is seeking answers on how they will reduce greenhouse. When we say they, we are talking of the oil and gas companies. How are they going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And how are they what plan do they have in place to alter their operations to achieve these results? There are no easy ways, but they just have to do it. So one way oil and gas companies can start making the transition to clean energy is by embracing the idea of becoming multifaceted energy companies, more like an integrated, kind of, arrangement. Rather than just focusing on oil and gas, you need to embrace the idea of becoming a multifaceted energy companies. So instead of dealing in business related to fossil fuels, companies can begin offering their energy sources like biofuels and electricity generated through renewable sources like wind, solar, and hydropower. They can take significant steps in reducing their overall, emissions. Now, efficiently limiting the amount of methane they produce is one area oil and gas companies can improve. And of course, another option is to produce their gas and oil products using zero emission methods. That's in terms of technology, such as utilizing electricity for oil and gas production. And finally, they can begin transitioning to hydrogen, which can better power heavy machinery than batteries. So there's a lot the oil and gas companies, So the point is, these are the recommendations that we are making. If, because the question is how can oil and energy companies, play a leading role in this energy transition? We are saying they need to play a very, very significant role. And we have also said that the oil and gas companies need to play this role using those 6 channels that we talked about much earlier. But we have a very some strong recommendations that we want to make to be able to help these oil and gas companies to be able to galvanize to be able to navigate the curve in terms of being able to lead, the energy transition, strategy and proposals. The first thing is that they should build strategies for low carbon business models. Low carbon business models. That's what they need to do. That minimize carbon use while remaining profitable, and also go ahead to articulate these strategies clearly to markets and other stakeholders. That's my first recommendation. The second one is that they need to support the development of ESG metrics that are transparent, objective, and accessible to investors. Number three, they need to also invest in the concept of net zero emissions and the circular economy while adhering to the nationally determined contributions model of the Paris Agreement. Number four, they need to encourage the growth of international carbon markets through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and expand the possibilities for joint cross-border projects for emissions reduction. And that's where comes in. Can said they're ready to partner globally. That's what we are talking about. And of course, they need to develop a workforce strategy that leverages the above into restoring oil and gas as an attractive destination for younger talent concerned about the ESG footprint and stranded, asset risk of the industry. Now, here is Siemens Energy. You can see that Siemens here, they have 10 priorities for successful energy transformation pathway. This is what we are saying. Every oil and gas company, they need to come up with their strategies. Siemens has these 10 priorities, and I think you at your spare time, you need to take a look at these priorities. So every oil and gas company, they need to come up with a pathway. They need to come up with strategy, as to how they can play very, very significant role in this energy transition. Siemens, this is clearly their 10 priorities, and others can also come up with their own priorities. So in conclusion, distinguished, I would say, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, over the past decade, renewables have changed our energy systems and have proven effective of many developed nations. But for the energy transition to be successful, it must occur globally in both developing, emerging markets, developing countries alike. It must be a global thing. It must be globally driven. And the next decade will be a crucial point in global decarbonization. I am very, very convinced about that the next decade will be it will be a turning point. Now, if this energy transition, if it is successful, then we see a situation where electrification will accelerate and renewables will become common in the developing world. And finally, the financial burden will fall on developed countries to support this change. The developing countries, and may I also include the emerging markets, their pockets are not very deep. And therefore, the drive towards a drive in this energy transition, we're saying that we want to advocate or push for the fact that developed countries need to come to the aid of developing countries, and also helping the oil and gas companies in terms of technology and other areas to help the drive towards this energy transition. So thank you very much, and I'm ready now to take your questions. Thank you.